evening and welcome to this really lovely presentation and special program on behalf of the Japan Society of Boston. I actually am a Japan culture specialist, but the real star of tonight's presentation is going to be Schneller Sligh, who is a master gardener and also a real scholar of Japanese gardens. And I want first to talk a little bit about the program before I get back to Lee, because we have quite some very interesting things we're going to be doing. As you've noticed probably, this is a program put on by the Japan Society of Boston, but it's kind of about Japanese gardens, but it's not about, at least not largely about Japanese gardens in Japan. It's about Japanese gardens in New England. In other words, gardens that were made, that were inspired by certain elements of design, certain kinds of plants, a certain kind of vision that the people who made the gardens took from Japan. But the gardens that you'll be seeing pretty much will be ones that are made up of elements from New England, the terrain, the landscape, the pine trees, the boulders, the rocks, the moss, and they'll be put together in their own unique and original and very beautiful ways. So from that point, it's going to be rather exciting because you'll be seeing some really unique gardens, which have a strong Japanese inspiration. And the person behind these unique gardens is Schneller Sligh, whom I consider my friend and also maybe sometimes co-collaborator or master teacher. And to explain that, I first met Lee a few years ago when my family and I came up to Maine to live part-time. And I've actually lived in Japan 8 years and always loved Japanese gardens. And now we had this new place with new area around it. And I looked at it, I thought, oh, maybe I can finally make my own Japanese garden. But where am I going to find someone who can help me make a Japanese garden in Mid-Coast, Maine? I mean, really, sorry, no offense to Mid-Coast, Maine, but just didn't seem the obvious place. Fortunately, I mentioned this to someone. They said, oh, there's a woman right over the town next to you who does Japanese gardens. I thought, really? Yeah, right, sure. But I looked her up and I thought, wow, who is this person, this Schneller Sligh? She's amazing. She went to Japan at 17. She speaks and reads Japanese. She did East Asian studies as an undergraduate. And she goes to Japan every other year with her very impressive Japanese garden crew. And I thought, my God, I've got to meet her. So I did. And when I mean collaboration and master teacher, Lee helped me build and was the main force behind building the Japanese garden that I now have here in Maine. So I'm very grateful to Lee and her vision and her sense of design and her knowledge of Japanese culture. But I also want to mention that she is a scholar of Japanese gardens. You'll see in the video here pretty soon that she has these books from the 1930s on Japanese gardens. She really knows her stuff, and it's very impressive to hear her speak and really appreciate all the wisdom that she's accumulated over the years. So I mentioned the video, and what I'd like to do now is tell you a little bit about the videos and just how the evening is going to work. We will start with 2 videos back to back that all will be about 13 minutes. And they're going to give you a kind of cinematic, atmospheric, imagistic vision of the Japanese gardens here in New England with interviews with Lee and her doing a voiceover as well. And then Naoko-san is going to introduce the slideshow that Lee is going to be giving. And that will be on the aesthetics of Japanese design. And that's where it's going to be very beautiful too as well, but we're also going to learn really some of the fascinating elements behind how a Japanese garden is put together. And then after that, we will have Q&A for I think about 20 minutes. Is that correct? And so if you want to question something during the slideshow, you can certainly do that if it's specific to the slide. But otherwise, we'd like you to keep your comments to the end, and we'll have plenty of time for them and to talk more at the end. So I think now we're going to be showing the video.
is Schneller Sligh, and I design and build gardens. One of my specialties is Japanese-inspired gardens. The word in Japanese for garden is niwa. That word originally meant hunting grounds, the places where people would go out and forage and hunt. And then as society became more agrarian and people were farming and they had houses and they weren't roaming the wilderness so much, that area around their house where they brought plants in from the forest, they began calling that niwa. The thing about gardens is they bring something from our wild nature in close to our cultivated living spaces. And I think that probably is, for me, the main attraction of gardening. Susan, I remember getting your email, and there was this fascinating woman who's a professor of Japanese studies at Tufts, and I thought, oh my gosh, and I immediately Googled you to see what you were like. And I was so surprised that we're almost the same age. There just aren't that many women who were in Japan early on, as late teenagers.
Well, I'm trying to remember how I first heard about you, because I think it must have been from someone up here in Rockport, and they said there's this woman who designs Japanese gardens right next town over. I thought, really? You're kidding, right? So I looked you up and I thought, yeah, and it was a little hard, but sure enough, you're Sligh, and then I think it said there was definitely a Japanese garden entry on Google for you, and I thought, wow, this is just, it feels like an omen or something. So I got to try this. And then again, you seem so friendly and smart and interesting. And then I discovered we'd both gone to Japan for the first time when we were 17. There are not that many people out there at our age who've done that. And
that was kind of an instant bonding thing, like, oh my gosh, and everything that meant, just culturally and as women, emotionally, the whole deal. I remember, going to my host family's house and going in the stone entryway, and then there were these wooden steps, and they were all waiting for me, and I didn't know you were supposed to take your shoes off.
Oh my God!
Lifted my foot up to step on the wooden step, and everybody just screamed.
I know that feeling. It's sort of like, uh-oh, I've clearly done something really bad, and I don't know exactly what it is.
The first of a million terrible faux pas.
Growing up in New England, I wasn't used to warm autumns. I just remember the gardens and going out to parks and into October and November. And then you had the ginkgo trees and the golden leaves just kind of shining like magical things twirling in the wind. And I remember just thinking, this is really different.
Oh yeah.
Because we can go right down through there.
Oh wow, yeah, that's a beauty. And nice and flat.
Yeah, it's nice and flat. It's not all that heavy.
This would be a great rock for naturalizing the smooth outflow river. And it's not doing anything back here. You really can't see it at all from the road. Loose in the landscape, yes.
My name is James Appleby, and I'm the head gardener and one of the lead designers here at Schneller Sligh Gardens. Lee and I, we come at things from a really similar place of just wanting gardens to be inhabitable spaces that are tied in both ecologically and architecturally to the structures that our clients live in.
The spiritual qualities of Japanese life are not separated from daily life. The way that, you anticipate the blossoms of a tree that are about to come, especially cherry blossoms are famous that way. And then while it's happening, you're enjoying it and appreciating it. And then after it's gone, there's a kind of bittersweet memory of a special blooming of a plant or seasonal activity. And I love that awareness of time and that kind of sensitivity towards the natural world.
Nami no tsu ni sasajima shigeru isobe kana. Bamboo grass on rocky Sasa Island, lush in the wave spray. I mean, that's a very Maine poem, I think. Yeah, really nice.
Shake is one of the kind of standard Japanese garden design principles. Literally, it means borrowed view. You include in your composition something that is viewed at a distance. In this case, there are these beautiful islands, the Muscle Ridge Islands right out here. I wanted to connect that to the front yard, which was just a lawn going, kind of dropping off to the ocean. I went to Japan as an exchange student when I was 17. I was really lucky to be able to do that. And the family I stayed with was a really special family. My host father was a very emotional Japanese man. He had been tremendously impacted emotionally by the war, by World War II. And he came out of that experience wanting to devote his life to world peace. He believed it with every fiber of his body. He was just so strongly motivated by that. Of the three children in that family, one of them is my Japanese host sister, Yasuko, is one of my lifelong closest friends. And she has carried on that work, working towards improving world understanding and world peace. They have both motivated me to try to improve relations and understanding between Japan and the United States. One of the ways that I do that is by building Japanese-inspired gardens here, but also by taking my crew to Japan. We've gotten into a pattern where every 2 years I take my entire gardening crew, which is usually about 10 people. We go to Japan for 2 weeks. And there's nothing like being immersed in the culture and the aesthetics of Japan. So now I've had the honor of taking dozens of people to Japan and introducing them to the culture the same way that I was lucky to be able to go when I was 17. It's a weeping threadleaf Japanese maple. And you can see that the shape of it is, it goes up to a certain point and then the branches cascade down. The leaves, each individual leaf, this is called threadleaf. Maine is full of fabulous materials for building Japanese-inspired gardens. We have so much beautiful stone here with beautiful patina, haircap moss. That's exactly the same plant that is found in gardens in Japan. There's not a whole lot of overlap in actual species between Japan and New England, but haircap moss is one of them. There are certain types of Japanese maples that will grow nicely in Maine. Another plant that we use fairly frequently are pines. And you want the pine tree to be irregularly shaped. We like to use pitch pines, Pinus rigida, which is native to Maine, and you can see it growing all over Acadia National Park on the cliffs and so forth. Some of the oldest gardens in Japan, date from the 500s, 600s, 700s. I was able to find a complete set of this really amazing 26-volume treatise on Japanese gardens. This was written in 1939 by a garden designer and historian named Shigemori Mirei. There have been books written on him. He and the cats love these books too. He designed a lot of gardens in addition to cataloging them, and the 26-volume set details every major garden in Japan in 1939. So it gives a historical perspective. Making a garden look natural and believable is kind of how we think of it, is one of the most important things that we do. We learn about how to make that happen by studying natural scenes. We go to wild rivers and mountaintops and look at the way that plants behave in certain circumstances and the way that stones are. And a good example of that is if we're making a dry river garden, we'll use smooth stones for the river course itself, and then on the riverbanks there will be crusty rocks covered with patina. PowerPoint shows some of the gardens that were shown in the video in more detail, and I'm going to be talking about kind of basic Japanese garden design principles, and also talking a little bit about stones and the way that we use them. Next slide, please. I've come up with this little system for marking each photograph so that you can tell right away where the picture was taken. So a J in the upper right-hand corner means it's a garden in Japan, and LSFG means it was made by us. And then the location is in the lower left corner and the photographer in the right-hand corner. Next. I wanted to start by talking about hide and reveal, and this is a great example of it at this beautiful, really tiny garden on Koyasan. And hide and reveal is basically just the idea that it's a lot more interesting. A garden is more interesting if when you walk into it, you can't just see the entire thing all at once. It's a lot more interesting if you're kind of, enticed around a corner, or, if you have the urge to follow a path into an area that can't be seen. And you can use different materials like trees to hide the destination that you're heading towards. Sometimes the view going away is completely blocked, like in this case where you really have no idea where it's going. And in some cases, it's just kind of filtered or screened a little bit. Next. Here's hide and reveal in Susan's garden in Rockport, where we made a little path. This whole area was actually just lawn to begin with. It was completely flat, and we built up mounded areas, which you can see just the tip of it in kind of the center left of the picture. That's the tip of a mound. And we planted trees and, you know, created this little path. We call this the Scholars Grove. Um, and it's a good example of hide and reveal. We made it more interesting and enticing to walk this way. Next. Another example of hide and reveal in not a Japanese style garden is this part of, this is the Owl's Head garden that's shown in the video, but this is a different part of it that's not the Japanese inspired part. And we use Japanese garden design principles in all of our gardens, whether they look Japanese or not. And here, hide and reveal, we ran the path in a circle around this birch tree so that you couldn't see where it was going. And this path actually just leads to a kind of utility area on the other side of the house. It's not really a true destination that you would want to go to. But a lot of the way that hide and reveal works is it gives you the impression, you can have kind of a mental journey. It gives you the impression that there's someplace nice to go. And there doesn't necessarily need to be someplace nice at the end of the path. Next. This was actually the very first Japanese inspired garden that we made. It illustrates nicely the concept of hide and reveal. It's a really tiny garden, which is primarily made to be viewed from the kitchen sink, which is a primary viewing angle that I like to focus on because everybody spends a fair amount of time there, and it's nice to have something nice to look at out the window. But here, the fence and gate that you see there is actually right on the property line of the neighbor's property. And what is beyond the gate is not their land even. And yet it gives the feeling that it's leading to a lovely stroll through the woods. Another thing that is nice about this garden is we used over 20 different species of native plants here. And I like to do that because in part, one of the most important Japanese garden design principles is that a garden should not look exotic in its surroundings. So if you're working in New England, it makes sense to use plants that are native or look native, yet are arranged in a way that evokes or uses Japanese garden design principles. Next. Here we are back in Owl's Head again. This is a before picture of the Owl's Head house. And when we started working on this area, the ocean is towards the right, and there was this very awkward foundation line and very awkward dropping away of the grade that we had to deal with to make this area look nice. And this is the front door actually. So next slide. This is how we handled that by building a really large stone raised bed and making these brick pathways. We do all of our own stonework and brickwork and so forth, boulders. So everything that you see in these gardens, almost without exception, we did ourselves as a crew. And here, this isn't really so much hide and reveal as it is hide. We're hiding something that you don't want to see, which is that awkward foundation line. And the raised bed is actually separated from the building by a very narrow pathway of about 12 inches or so, because the stonework rises up into the area that is wood. So the raised bed could not touch the building or it would make the wood rot. The tall white flowers there are Actea racemosa, and this is August, and they are a lovely kind of late blooming plant that is excellent for screening, like in a situation like this. that's the kitchen window there. And those plants both give the dishwasher something interesting to look at while they're washing the dishes, as well as screening the view into the kitchen from a nearby house across the way. So I love using tall, airy plants like this to do this kind of gentle screening. Next. Here's that same area, that same raised bed is on the left here. And this is the view as you come out of the front door. These are delphiniums and tall alliums that are blooming in June. One of my other primary interests is designing continuously blooming gardens or consecutively blooming gardens. And this is an example of that. So in June, the person who's washing the dishes gets to enjoy looking at the delphiniums and the tall alliums, and those do that job of screening also. So now we're following around the house here. We've gone down towards the water on the other side of the house. And this is where, in the video, this was shown to where we did this thing with this strip of boulders that's about 2/3 of the way up the screen. That was not there. This was just kind of a scruffy lawn. And I didn't want to put something in there that competed with the distant Muscle Ridge Islands. And so my solution was to put in this strip of boulders and some kind of scrubby little spruces and foliage plants, wild roses that tumble around the rocks and make it look kind of natural. I didn't want to compete with the distant islands, and but it was necessary to put something here because just beyond those boulders, there's a drop of a couple of feet, and then actually an access road, which goes to, it's a deeded access road to the neighbor's septic system. So that had to be kept open, and yet it was really unsightly until we put these boulders in, and then it kind of connected it to the distant view. Next. This area is just outside the spa on the same house. We've turned the corner and we're going on. And I put this here because I had this idea that it would be lovely to come out of the spa and sit on this little bench and wiggle your toes around in this lovely cool moss. And the moss, as many of you who've been to Japan or studied Japanese gardens know, this is a way that we pay homage to a very famous garden by Shigemori Mide at Tofukuji, the moss checkerboard garden. And that's shown in the next photo. Next, please. So this is one of those gardens that he built in 1939 at Tofukuji, which was his very first commission, which he did for $0. It was a donation of his time. And if you've ever been to this temple, it has a whole suite of gardens that run around this building. And the moss checkerboard is one of the most beautiful and amazing ones. Next. So the beauty of empty space, or yohaku no bi, is the idea that a garden will look too cluttered if it's all full of stuff, and that it's good to have a contrast between empty areas and busy areas. In Japan, this is often done with special types of raked gravel like this one. Next slide. And they also use moss. So here it is in Saihoji, the very famous moss temple in Kyoto. Next. We used grass to express the beauty of empty space. This is Susan's garden in Rockport shortly after it was completed. And it's convenient to do this in the United States because people tend to have grass, they have lawns, and you can carve out the lawn and make the lawn conform to your garden, rather than you know, making your lawn and then forcing the garden to, follow the contours of the lawn. We kind of have that backwards. I think you want to, make the lawn conform to the garden. So here, the smooth emptiness of the lawn is a nice contrast with the busier parts of the garden. Next. Here's a before photo of the site of the garden. And you can see in the background above the Adirondack chairs that there was a kind of a grade change, a very abrupt, awkward grade change there, and a scruffy, grassy hill that really, it wouldn't grow grass very well. And it was too big to plant with something else, and just kind of awkwardly in this area. And we used that as a reason to put in a waterfall. Often waterfalls in gardens can look quite artificial if they look like they're coming out of nowhere. But here we were blessed with this lovely drop off, so we could build a waterfall on the bank and then run the garden right along close to the building. Next. Here you can see the waterfall and the dry stream running along, and we wanted to make it so that the garden was looked beautiful from the large windows on this floor. So we brought the garden right up to the garden and the stream right up to the house here. Next. Here it is under construction, and you can see here kind of clearly what I talked about in the video about using smooth stones for the stream bed and then coarser stones for the areas that would be out of the water. And of course, a dry landscape garden like this in Japanese is called kare sansui. Next. This is the view down from the top of the waterfall. And I should say all of these photos were taken shortly after the garden was completed. So the plants have not filled in and naturalized along the stream banks the way that they are now. But when that happens, or it has happened now, we just don't have pictures of them to show you right here. But the interface between the stream and the banks beside it has been much softened. Next. Here are some Japanese irises growing along the stream bank. One of the things that's important when you make a garden like this is like there are these Japanese garden junipers, Juniperus procumbens nana in the foreground and along the edges of the bank. And those have now grown and spread along the banks, and they keep trying to spread into the river. And the Japanese irises have grown and spread. All of these plants have spread. And it's important to continue to edit that and keep it looking realistic and believable as time goes by. Because if you left this alone and just kind of let it do its own thing, you'd get big, strange clumps of plants where they wouldn't look natural. But when you look at a wild river and the way that the plants grow, for example, you'll see that, like, if there's a curve in the river, the outside curve tends to be scoured by the water, the action of the water flowing down the stream. And so it doesn't tend to have a lot of plants there. Whereas just around the corner on the inside of the curve, there's often a cluster of plants, irises or grasses or whatever, because that's where the flow of the stream has gotten slower. So if you're kind of thinking about how would water move through this if this were not dry, how would water move through this, and where would it be fast, where would it be slow, where would it be hitting the banks, you can make a dry landscape look quite believable. Next. In the, now we're back at the Owl's Head Garden in the small Japanese courtyard garden. And here there's also an example of the beauty of empty space. And this was originally not like this. It was very densely planted in the courtyard garden. And after the client and I went to Japan together in 2017, when we came back, she said, where is my dry garden? Because we had not put in a dry garden here. And so we removed a bunch of plants and created this dry area, which definitely improved the look of this area. We talk about, usually we do quite a lot of what we call subtractive gardening, where you just remove a bunch of things because there's too much planted. But usually we're doing that to other gardens, not ones that we have designed ourselves. I think this was the first time that we subtracted from our own garden. Next. And the first section of dry garden, everybody thought it looked so good that we added on and added another section of dry garden. This definitely improved the area, made it less claustrophobic and nicer to be there. Next. This is a picture before we subtracted plants and opened up that space with the beauty of empty space. And you can see that it's kind of crowded feeling in here. Although this garden is really made to be viewed from inside the house, but it's nice to be able to, and from inside it did not look quite this cluttered, I would say. But it definitely feels better to be there now. Next. And here's a kind of panoramic view of the courtyard garden after we opened up the empty spaces and removed a bunch of plants. Next. We do a lot of work with boulders and rocks, and you know, there's such great material to work with that way in Maine. We're very lucky that way. Next. The Sakuteki is a 1,000-year-old gardening manual that talks about how to set stones and gives lots of tips and information about how to make a garden look believable and look natural. And that book is still in use today in Japan by garden designers. Next. Moving stones around is a complicated and expensive job. Good stones are expensive, mainly because of the cost of labor moving them. But here we're working with a big stone, and with our tripod. This tripod will lift about 3 tons, and we use it to move around our bigger, heavier stones. We're careful to use nylon straps and padding. You can see on the rock, kind of in the foreground, there's a pile of old blue jeans. We use old blue jeans to pad rocks. That's very convenient, kind of tough material. And if you scratch rocks that have a good patina, it takes a really, really long time for the rock to recover its natural patina. Next. So here is that same stone that we were lifting up, and it's been set in the ground now. You can see that a lot of the stone has disappeared. It's actually set about half of its total length is in the ground. And that's because you want to make sure that any kind of undercut on the base of the stone is buried so that it will look firmly planted. This rock is one that the clients happened to have on their property, which was really amazing. And one of my teachers at Kyoto University of Art and Design said that this kind of rock it's like a miniature landscape unto itself. The kind of path, the figure in the stone could read as like a mountain path that's going around, and you could see the moss as small trees or shrubs. And this was really a spectacular stone that we got to work with. Next. We're especially fond, and I should say when I speak of we, I'm speaking of my wonderful crew. We work together, we go to Japan together, we design together, we do all of these gardens together. It's absolutely not just me doing this. And many of the people that work with me have been with me for many years. And anyway, one of our favorite types of gardens are those built in Japan during the Momoyama period, which is a very short period in the 1500s when warlords were basically in charge of the country. And the gardens that were made during this time are very dynamic and use highly figured rock. They were not considered in good taste at the time that they were created, but we love this style, and it suits kind of the American love of drama and action, perhaps. Next. Visiting these gardens in person and looking at the way that they're put together is just an invaluable experience. And when we go as a crew, we look at all these gardens and get all kinds of inspiration and ideas for our work. Here again, this is another famous Momoyama period garden. Very out of the way. It's hardly visited by anyone, but we love to go to this one. It's on the island of Shikoku in Tokushima, and it's just an incredibly well preserved Momoyama period garden, really one of the best in Japan, but it's not visited that much because it's in kind of an out of the way place. Next. So we used the inspiration of those gardens when we built this one in Rockport, using dynamic rock work and highly figured rock. The clients luckily had property adjacent to their house where they had woods that were just filled with tons and tons and tons of these gorgeous stones. And we very carefully moved them into position and set them up to make this dramatic pond garden. Next. Building ponds. This is us building that pond that was shown in the last frame. This is one of the most fun things that we do, and it's very creative. You kind of make it up as you go along. There are certain things that you have to do, technically, to technical considerations that you have to observe. But there's a lot of creative effort that goes into this and a lot of teamwork. Next. Here we're moving a really big stone using some of the special equipment, including the tripod that we saw before. And there's also a roller conveyor, a section of roller conveyor here on the ground under the stone that's rolling along planks. And that's a method of moving around heavy stones that's quite convenient and effective. And you can see we've got this rock all strapped up with nylon straps, and we're being careful not to scratch it. Next. Um, Here we're setting this stone in place. We'll actually set it down and get it the way that we want it, and then lift it back up and slide the pond liner underneath it when we're ready for that. It's kind of tricky figuring out, how to lift the stone and protect the liner while you're working with it. But in the background, you can see the house that's the location of this garden. The clients were both architects, and the house is very dramatic and in a really prominent, high, tall location. And it was just perfectly suited for this type of really dynamic rock work. Next. And here's another shot of the finished garden, and with a bit of water lilies and lotuses that we had planted there. Next. We like to study natural scenery to get inspiration and to learn how to make gardens believable, especially gardens that involve water or dry, dry gardens that evoke the sense of water. This is one that I went to on Yakushima Island, south of Kyushu, a number of years ago. And I love this picture because it shows how jumbled up a natural river, what a natural river does to rocks. It kind of throws them all over the place. They end up wedged in here and there, very irregular and, tumbled. Not at all, kind of what you might think if you just sat down with a piece of paper and thought, well, I'm going to draw a river with rocks. You'd probably come up with something that was much more formal than this. Next. And back in Susan's garden, this photo from the top of the waterfall again, you can see where we used a rock in a special way. There's a little island in the stream just below the waterfall, and there's a boulder set on this end of it, and that boulder justifies the existence of the island. If there wasn't a boulder there, then the water gushing down the waterfall would naturally sweep away any soil that was in that area. So the boulder helps to make the island believable. And this again is an early photo from the early days of the garden. And right now the boulder, in this photo, the boulder and the island look quite separate from each other in an artificial way. But now this is all kind of smooth, blended together, and looks even more natural. Next. This garden that we made in Camden has a stream, a real stream that comes into it, and then quite a deep pond and an outflow. We actually made this garden as a stormwater management feature because there was this seasonally flooding water that would come down off the adjacent mountain and sweep away everything in the location where this pond is now. So there's a stream coming into this, and then we jumbled these rocks up so that it would look like the forceful water of the stream just tumbled and jumbled these stones together. Next. This garden in Otsu near Kyoto is an old one, but this is a completely artificial stream. And I just wanted to show this to show how believable it is. It's they've done a wonderful job of the stones along the edges. Not only are they mossy and natural looking, but There's a difference in the elevation of stones and a jagged back and forth type of motion in the stream banks. And that's how real wild streams look. They aren't kind of neatly contained between, two parallel lines. Next. This garden that we made in Nobleborough some years ago, we used these beautiful moss covered rocks that were available in the landscape. And this picture was taken on the day that we finished building the garden. And you can see how by moving the rocks around carefully and preserving the moss on them, we were able to make this garden look really pretty old, even when it was brand new. And that's always a goal of ours. Next. A couple more slides. This is a pond. In this photo, it's still under construction, but one that we made in Newcastle. And you can see that it really helps to have rocks of many different sizes and as many big rocks as you can manage to manage or afford to use, because they are what really give it weight and make it look believable. Also, things like in kind of the center right of the photo, there's a big rock that slides down into the water. That's a very natural looking kind of configuration. Also, having on the left-hand side, there's kind of a flat stone that juts out into the pond a little bit, and that gives you a place to kind of squat or sit if you're gazing into the pond, and that's kind of a Japanese sort of feature. Next. This is what was there when we started. We were actually hired to fix an old pond that had been put in, which this is a picture of. And here there were some issues, one of which was the liner was not watertight, so the pond didn't hold water. But then the main problem with this is that all of the rocks are the same size. They're all kind of the same size and not really weathered looking. And so and they're arranged in a circle, which looks quite unnatural. So that's, kind of what we're, trying not to do and trying to make things look more natural. Next. And this is the last picture in the slideshow, which is most of the people, not all, I'm sorry to say, of the crew from our crew trip to Japan last fall. And here we are in one of the gardens that we showed in the slideshow, an old one from the Momoyama period that's in a remote location that we really love to go to. And very grateful to the crew and my Japanese sister Yasuko is on the right-hand side there, and the head priest of the temple where this garden is. So that's the whole slideshow. And if people have questions now, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Lee. That was really amazing. I really felt your love and passion for these spectacular gardens. We have quite a few questions. Let's see. I think I can go down fairly straightforwardly. Is there a public garden Lee has designed that people can visit? Wouldn't that be great?
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there is not. I'm sorry to say. But there's a very lovely Astaku azalea garden in Northeast Harbor. Is a truly spectacular world-class garden where the head gardener, Mary Roper, has done wonders with that garden. And she's a very good friend of mine. Well worth a trip up there.
I can second that. It's gorgeous. It's really, just a bit of Japan or, beauty right in the middle of near Bar Harbor, Maine. Okay, here's someone who wants to know, how do these principles that you were talking about in your slideshow relate to Four Seasons visuals?
Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're thinking about what you talk about in how you write in your book about the Four Seasons gardens, but they
Oh,
say,
right.
how do these principles relate to Four Seasons visuals? And they
Mm,
really appreciated your the thing about love the kitchen idea of unloading the dishwasher and looking at this lovely garden.
right. Well, with our non-Japanese gardens, we always design continuously blooming gardens that bloom through the season with lots of things, usually lots of things blooming at once. But with Japanese gardens, it's more like you want to design for timed bloom. And ideally, you don't have more than one special thing blooming at a time, because there's this lovely way of appreciating the passage of time where, when something special is about to bloom, you're anticipating it, then you enjoy it. And then there's a bittersweet memory of it having been in bloom. If you have too much stuff in the garden that's blooming all at the same time, that would destroy that effect. And on the other hand, a lot of our clients have a kind of more Japanese part of the garden and a more Western part. The Western part is brighter and more colorful and more exciting. And the Japanese part is generally more peaceful and quiet. And the taking special care with what is exactly blooming in there is key to making that work.
Wow. So you like, in a way, the Japanese garden is more subtle, and
Yes.
yeah, Western garden is more, ebullient,
Right.
talking
Mhm.
about itself all the time. Yeah. Okay. Here's someone wants to know, is dry garden, kare sansui, is that the same thing? Is that synonymous to the beauty of empty space?
No, no, the kare sansui just refers to a dry garden that evokes water. So, a dry stream would be kare sansui. Um, but the beauty of empty space is is much more just kind of a blank spot that contrasts with a busy area.
Yeah, I can say that the empty space is a really interesting, important concept in Japan. It actually shows up in Japanese film too. And the idea is that, like, Ozu or even Miyazaki uses, or Takahata uses moments of blankness to kind of give you a little bit of a rest, to kind of appreciate the larger, sacred quality of the world. Here's one from, I think this is from one of my former students. It's worth noting that you've mentioned a few times, this would be you, Lee, that it takes human intervention in order for the garden to look natural. Can you say more about that issue?
Yeah, so Japanese gardening is not at all natural, but it's made to evoke a sense of naturalness. And an example of that, I wish I had time for more slides, but there's in Ritsurin Koen in down in Shikoku, there's a pine tree jutting out over the pond that's photographed frequently. And it's about 300 years old, but it has, clear, greenery and then clear trunk. And, it looks very clean and natural, but it's not at all natural. It's been very, very carefully pruned to accentuate the sweep of the lines and the shape of the canopy. So when you look at it, you think, oh my gosh, there's a really old, natural, beautiful pine, but it's not natural. So Japanese gardening is really about, making things look natural or evoke nature without actually being natural.
Cool. Here's a good one that I've often wondered about. Do you have a recommended way to acquire larger boulders for those of us not in Maine?
Well, it's always a challenge. I don't have a recommendation for that. Whenever we build a garden, we, kind of conceptualize what, a possible design, and we look at the budget, and then we kind of look around and see at the very early stages, we look around to see what kind of stones we might be able to get from, from the area. And we've got people that we work with, we buy stones from certain people over and over again, but it's definitely not a science. A lot of times it's a matter of kind of seeing some stones that look good and then approaching the property owner and asking them if they're interested in selling them. It's pretty haphazard.
You don't go back in the middle of the night and
Yeah.
take them away on your tripod. Right. Do you ever return to garden projects years later to see its condition or progress?
Do we ever go back? Was that to see its condition or progress? Yeah. Luckily, we're very lucky in that many of our clients, like Susan and Steve, keep us on as the maintenance people for the garden. And that's a service that we really only offer to people whose gardens we have built, because our crew is relatively small. We found that if you try to make the crew bigger than a certain size, quality control is impossible. So we only have so many people and we only have so much time. And so we are very lucky that most of our best work, we are also in the business of maintaining it. And then that way we can continue to guide it and make sure that the plants are growing in and doing what we intended them to do.
Yes, every so often we have little tiffs or disagreements, because I did decide I wanted a little bit more color in the garden, despite, of course, loving the subtlety of Japanese gardens. Here's a very, very helpful one. With the dry stream, do you have a liner or a ground cloth underneath?
Yeah, so there are two important points when you're making a dry stream bed like that. One is to use really good, heavy, dense, permeable landscape fabric underneath the stones. So that'll keep weeds from growing up through. And the second most important point is you want to make sure that the stones are clean when you put them in there, because if there's dirt on them, that will collect underneath the stones, between the stones and the landscape fabric, and weeds will grow in there. So it exponentially increases your maintenance costs in the future if you don't clean the stones off carefully before you put them in. And over the course of time, after quite a while, stuff builds up in the stream bed anyway, and then you need to take it apart and clean it and put it back together again. But you can postpone that process a lot by just making sure the stones are clean before you start.
Wow, I actually didn't know that. Thank you. Do you have examples of Japanese tea gardens?
Do we build Japanese tea gardens?
Yeah, I'm not, that it just says, do you have examples of Japanese tea gardens?
Well, I built kind of a Japanese tea garden at my old house in South Thomaston, but that isn't something that we have really been called to do for a client. It's really a very special kind of thing, a tea garden. It doesn't really lend itself that well to a kind of adaptation to a Western residential landscape. So no, we haven't done that.
Okay. Actually, just to go back to the dry riverbed lining, someone has asked, how many years does the dry riverbed lining last for? 50 years? Ooh, it's an amazing question. Love to know this.
Well, high quality non-woven landscape fabric lasts for quite a while. I can't tell you exactly how long, but I would certainly expect it if it's covered with stones, which also helps protect it from UV light, which would make it deteriorate. If it's covered with stones, I would expect it to last at least 20 years, maybe more, 30 years. I don't know.
Okay, and one last one. For a small mound at the end of a 30-foot white gravel garden, what ground cover would you recommend? Someone says elfantime, then they say elfantime did not survive the winter. Is that a kind of ground cover? I'm not sure of it.
At the end of a 30-foot, a small
White
mound
gravel garden.
of a 30-foot gravel garden.
Yeah.
That's it. I can't really answer that question without seeing it in more detail than that. If the person wants to give more detail, like is the vantage point, the primary vantage point is a really important thing in choosing plants, to choosing everything for the garden. The primary viewing angles are really important. Like, is the mound something that's going to be viewed up close as well as far away? Because if something is going to be viewed up close, it needs to have a texture that is not too coarse and not too scruffy looking. Whereas if something is viewed from a distance, you can get away with using something that doesn't really look good up close, but that's very dramatic and beautiful at a distance. So it's just kind of too hard to answer that question. Sorry.
Here's one that may be a little bit easier. Can you talk about how to garden with moss? I love it, this is the person, but haven't had much success finding a good source to buy it and how to make sure it takes to the soil. I totally appreciate this question.
Mhm. Yeah, gardening with moss is tricky, and moss requires a special environment, certain amount of moisture and a little bit of shade. They're very different types of moss that like different circumstances. So the best thing to do is, what we do is we try to get the moss off of our clients' land. If you look around, you might find some on your property that you weren't even aware of. That's ideal, is to find some that way. Otherwise, getting permission from somebody who has mossy land to take some out. Whichever way you do it, you want to don't take all of the moss in an area. If you just take out chunks that are this big, it can fill back in. It will grow back in if you don't take too much of it from a certain spot. And generally too, taking with the moss as much of what it's growing on as you can is a good rule if you want to have success with it. But there are really different types of moss. Like, there are mosses that grow on stones, and you can peel those off of stones and then put them onto other stones by making a kind of silly putty substance out of, like, peat moss and clay soil, kind of mush that up together and lay a thin layer of it on the rock, and then press the sheet moss that you peeled off onto the new rock, keep it moist, and it will gradually attach to the rock. But it has to be kind of in shade, some shade. You need to pay attention to that. It needs to have moisture. And if you don't have the right circumstances, even if you successfully establish moss, it's going to be very high maintenance if you have to water it all the time.
Thank you. Actually, someone, Liz and Warren, has posted an article on gardening with moss. So hopefully that will be sent to everyone because it looks very helpful.
And
Yeah.
Let me just say, Liz Stanley was a very long time crew member. She works at University of Maine Cooperative Extension. And thank you, Liz, for many of the still shots that were in the video were taken by Liz. Liz worked with us for, I think, 15 years. Very highly valued crew member.
One final question, I think, and then we probably should break. And I think this is the last one. Question from Joe. How did Japanese gardeners centuries ago prevent weeds in dry gardens? How do they do it today?
Well, centuries ago, there was basically free labor. And that's how they got everything done in those days. You know, nowadays, the challenge is that labor is very much not free. And almost everybody that we work for wants to have a low maintenance garden. So we're very, very focused on creating gardens that make use of, we try not to fight the site, try to work with the grade, work with the dryness and moistness, and plant things that will survive without a lot of effort.
Fascinating. Well, I think that's it for the questions. And really, really, thanks a lot. One more thing, Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses is recommended by the person who wrote it is Robin Wall Kimmerer. I'm going to get that, Gathering Moss. So
that's a wonderful book. I have that book. It's really
cool.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Lee. This has been really, really enlightening. And thank you for all the beautiful things we got to see. Thank you.